Deputy Sam Hayes coughed blood onto the dusty ground as Sheriff Jake Morrison pressed his hands against the bullet wounds that were stealing his partner's life. The shootout with the Garrett gang had lasted only minutes, but those minutes had shattered everything Jake thought he knew about his quiet life in Redemption Creek. Sam's eyes, once bright with the laughter that made even the worst days bearable, were fading fast in the afternoon heat that seemed to mock their desperate situation. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Listen to me, Jake, Sam wheezed, his fingers clutching at Jake's vest with surprising strength. There's something I never told you about. At Madame Rose's place. His voice cracked like dry leather, each word a struggle against the darkness closing in around him. The girl, Isabella Rose. She's carrying my baby. Jake felt his world tilt sideways. In 5 years of partnership, Sam had never mentioned any romantic entanglements, never spoke of women beyond polite greetings on the street. The revelation hit harder than any bullet could have, not because of judgment, but because his best friend had carried this secret alone. Sam, save your strength, Jake said, though they both knew it was useless comfort. We'll get you to Doc Martinez, get you patched up, and then we can talk about. No time, Sam interrupted, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Promise me, Jake. Promise me you'll take care of her and the baby. But listen close, the child ain't what you think. Ain't what anyone thinks. His grip tightened with desperate urgency. There's something different about it. Something holy maybe. Or cursed. I ain't sure which. Jake's throat constricted as he watched his partner fight to stay conscious long enough to deliver whatever message was burning inside him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the abandoned barn where they'd cornered the outlaws, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of approaching horses, probably Doc Martinez and the Undertaker, alerted by the gunshots that had echoed across the valley like thunder. Sam's breathing became shallow and rapid. She's due any day now, and when that baby comes, promise me you'll protect them both. The town, they won't understand. They'll be afraid. His eyes found Jake's face with crystalline clarity, as if death had burned away everything except the truth he needed to share. The baby's special, Jake. Born for a purpose none of us can imagine. What are you talking about? Jake demanded, leaning closer as Sam's voice grew weaker. Special how? What purpose? But Sam's eyes were already losing focus, looking past Jake towards something only he could see. Love changes everything, he whispered, his words barely audible above the wind rustling through the broken barn walls. Even a place like this, even people like us, love can make miracles happen. His hand fell away from Jake's vest, landing in the dust with terrible finality. Jake knelt beside his partner's still form as the approaching riders grew closer, their hoofbeats marking time like a funeral dirge. He'd made thousands of promises in his life, most of them forgotten before the words finished leaving his mouth. But Sam's final request echoed in his mind with the weight of sacred vow, binding him to a future he couldn't understand and a responsibility that already felt heavier than his badge. As Doc Martinez's wagon rattled into the barnyard, Jake closed Sam's eyes and whispered the words that would change everything. I promise, partner. Whatever that baby is, whatever it means, I'll keep them safe. He had no idea that keeping that promise would challenge everything he believed about God, miracles, and the power of love to transform the most broken places on earth. 3 days after burying Sam Hayes, Jake Morrison stood outside Madame Rose's establishment like a man facing his own execution. The two-story building squatted at the edge of Redemption Creek's respectable district, painted red as fresh blood and decorated with lace curtains that fooled nobody about what went on behind them. Piano music drifted through the evening air, mixing with laughter that sounded forced and desperate, the kind of merriment that men paid for when they couldn't find it anywhere else. Jake had walked past this place hundreds of times in 5 years of sheriffing, always looking straight ahead, always pretending it didn't exist. Now he was about to enter it on a mission that would have scandalized every church lady in 3 counties. The weight of Sam's dying words pressed on his shoulders like a physical burden, but a promise to a dead partner was sacred, no matter how uncomfortable it made him. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Madame Rosa herself in all her faded glory. Once beautiful, now painted and powdered to hide the years that showed in her eyes. She studied Jake with the calculating gaze of a woman who'd survived by reading men's desires and weaknesses. "Sheriff Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a French accent that may or may not have been genuine. "I wondered when you'd come calling about poor Sam's girl." "You know why I'm here," Jake said, removing his hat with reluctant respect. The etiquette of dealing with madams wasn't covered in any law enforcement manual he'd ever read. "I need to see Isabella Rose." Rose's expression softened slightly, revealing genuine grief beneath her professional mask. "Sam was a good man, better than most who darkened my doorway." She stepped aside to let him enter, the gesture carrying weight of shared mourning. "Isabella's been expecting you. That girl's got the sight, you know. Sees things coming before they happen." The interior of the brothel was exactly what Jake had imagined and nothing like what he'd expected. Rich red velvet and dark wood created an atmosphere of expensive intimacy, but underneath the perfume and cigar smoke, he detected something else. Sadness, desperation, the kind of hopelessness that drove people to sell pieces of their souls just to survive another day. "She's upstairs, first room on the right," Rosa continued, leading him past curious gazes from girls who couldn't have been much older than 20. "But Sheriff, you should know something before you see her. Isabella's been different since Sam died. Claims the baby's been talking to her, telling her things about what's coming." Jake's blood chilled as he remembered Sam's cryptic words about the child being special. "What kind of things?" "Says there's going to be trouble. Bad men coming to town. And the baby's the only thing that can stop them." Rosa shrugged, as if discussing the weather rather than prophecies from an unborn child. Could be grief making her imagine things. Could be the baby pressing on her brain, making her see visions. Or could be what she claims it is. The narrow hallway upstairs creaked under Jake's boots as he approached the first room on the right. He knocked softly, then heard a voice that made his heart ache with its fragility. "Come in, Sheriff. I've been waiting for you." Isabella Rose sat by the window, her profile silhouetted against the dying light like something from a painting. She was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 22, with dark hair that fell in waves around a face that would have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion etched into every feature. Her pregnancy was obvious beneath a simple blue dress, her belly so large it looked like the baby might arrive any moment. "Sam told you about me," she said without looking away from the window. It wasn't a question. He said you were the most honorable man he'd ever known. Said if anything happened to him, you'd keep your word no matter what it cost you. Jake moved into the room, noting how clean and simple it was compared to the gaudy decoration downstairs. A single bed, a washstand, a rocking chair that looked handmade with love. This wasn't the room of a working girl. This was the room of someone trying to build a life worth living. "He made me promise to take care of you and the baby," Jake said, sitting carefully in the chair across from her. "But he said some things I don't understand. About the child being special." Isabella finally turned to face him, and Jake felt his breath catch. Her eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed impossible in someone so young, as if she'd seen things that aged the soul faster than the body. "The baby speaks to me, Sheriff. Not in words, but in feelings, pictures, and what she shows me." Isabella's hand moved protectively over her belly. "What she shows me is going to change everything." Jake asked, latching onto the one concrete detail in a conversation that felt like walking through fog. "A daughter. Sam's daughter. But more than that." Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's coming to heal something that's been broken in this place for a long time. The violence, the hatred, the pain that makes good men do terrible things and terrible men prosper. She's going to fix it. Jake stared at this young woman who spoke of miracles with the matter-of-fact tone most people use to discuss the weather. Part of him wanted to dismiss her words as the fantasies of a pregnant girl overwhelmed by grief and circumstance. But another part, the part that had heard the absolute conviction in Sam's dying voice, wondered if he was about to become guardian to something far beyond his understanding. "When's the baby due?" he asked, because it was the only practical question he could think of. Isabella smiled for the first time since he'd entered the room, and that smile transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely radiant. "Tonight, Sheriff. She's coming tonight. And when she does, nothing in Redemption Creek will ever be the same again." 3 months earlier, when Sam was still alive, the thunderstorm that changed Isabella's life forever arrived on a Tuesday night in early spring, when the desert air crackled with electricity and the sky split open like God was having second thoughts about creation. She'd been walking home from her job at the general store, one of the few respectable positions available to a woman with no family and a past that included 2 years at Madame Rose's before she'd saved enough to buy her freedom. The rain hit like bullets, driving her to seek shelter in the old abandoned church at the edge of town. The building hadn't seen a congregation in 5 years, not since Preacher Williams died, and no replacement could be found for a town that seemed more interested in sin than salvation. But the roof was mostly intact, and Isabella had always found peace in the empty pews where she could pray without judgment. That's where the strange man found her, though man might not have been the right word for what stepped through the church door as lightning illuminated the sanctuary. He was tall, dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to no particular time or place, and his eyes held depths that reminded Isabella of looking into a well at midnight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that made kings kneel and mountains move. "Isabella Rose," he said, and somehow she wasn't surprised that he knew her name. "You have been chosen for a purpose greater than you can imagine." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running into the storm rather than face this impossible encounter. Instead, she felt a peace descend on her spirit like warm sunlight breaking through winter clouds. "Chosen for what?" she asked, rising from the pew where she'd been sheltering. The stranger's presence filled the abandoned church with something that felt like the opposite of emptiness, as if holiness could be measured in the way shadows retreated from his form. "To carry hope into a world that has forgotten what it looks like," he replied, stepping closer. "To birth a child who will heal the wounds that men have torn in the fabric of creation itself." His hand moved toward her, and Isabella felt no fear, only a certainty that this moment had been written in the stars before she was born. The touch, when it came, was like being struck by lightning made of love rather than destruction. Power flowed through Isabella's body, changing something fundamental in her cells. Her spirit, her very essence. She felt herself becoming more than she had been, preparing for a purpose that her mind couldn't grasp but her heart accepted completely. When she opened her eyes, the stranger was gone, and Deputy Sam Hayes was kneeling beside her with concern etched across his weathered features. "Isabella, what happened?" "I saw the lightning hit the church and thought." He paused, studying her face in the dim light. "You look different, like you're glowing from the inside." Sam had been courting her quietly for 2 months, bringing her small gifts and walking her home from work with the shy devotion of a man who'd never expected to find love in a place like Redemption Creek. She'd grown fond of his gentle ways, his honest laughter, his complete lack of judgment about her past. But what she felt now went beyond fondness into something deeper and more mysterious. "Sam," she said, taking his hands in hers, "something wonderful has happened. Something that's going to change both our lives forever." She guided his palm to her belly, though she knew it was too early for him to feel anything yet. "I'm carrying your child." The confusion in his eyes was immediate and honest. "Isabella, we haven't." He stumbled over the words, his face flushing with embarrassment and bewilderment. "I know," she said gently. But the child is yours in every way that matters. Born from your love, destined to carry your name, meant to complete the family we're going to build together." The certainty in her voice seemed to convince Sam more than any explanation could have, and she watched understanding dawn in his expression like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Over the following weeks, as Isabella's pregnancy progressed with impossible speed, Sam became her protector and confidant. He listened without skepticism when she described the dreams that came every night, visions of their daughter bringing peace to conflicts that had raged for generations. He held her close when she woke, crying about the pain their child would witness before she could heal it. "The baby talks to me," Isabella told him one evening as they sat on the porch of the small house he'd rented for them outside town. "Not in words, but in feelings, images, understanding. She shows me things, Sam. Beautiful things and terrible things, all mixed together like ingredients in a recipe for hope." Sam's hand rested on her belly, which had grown to full term in just 3 months, defying every law of nature. "What does she show you about us? About our future?" Isabella's smile was radiant and heartbreaking at the same time. "She shows me that love is the only force powerful enough to stop the cycle of violence that's been destroying this land. And she shows me that you won't live to see her grown up, but your sacrifice will make her mission possible." The words hit Sam like physical blows, but he didn't pull away from her or demand explanations that wouldn't make sense. Instead, he pulled Isabella closer and whispered promises into her hair about protecting them both, about facing whatever was coming with courage worthy of the miracle growing inside her. 3 days later, the Garrett gang rode into town, and Sam Hayes died, keeping a promise he'd made to a child who hadn't been born yet, but who already understood that love and sacrifice were the same word written in different languages. Isabella felt her daughter's first movement the moment Sam's heart stopped beating, as if the baby was saying goodbye to the father whose love had called her into existence and whose death would make her birth possible. The circle was complete, the stage was set, and the miracle that would transform Redemption Creek was about to begin. The contractions started exactly at midnight, as if the baby had been waiting for the world to grow quiet before making her entrance. Isabella gripped the bedsheets in Jake's spare room, the one he'd hastily prepared after bringing her from Madame Rose's that very evening. Thunder rolled across the desert sky like God's own drums, and rain lashed against the windows with supernatural fury that made the whole house shake on its foundations. "Get Mrs. Patterson," Isabella gasped between waves of pain that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the lightning outside. "She's delivered half the babies in this county." But even as she spoke, Isabella's eyes held a strange certainty that made Jake hesitate. "Actually, no. Send for her. But she won't come. She'll be too afraid." Jake ran through the storm to fetch the midwife, but returned alone 15 minutes later, soaked to the skin and frustrated beyond measure. "You were right," he said, wringing water from his hat. "Soon as I mentioned your name, she crossed herself and slammed the door in my face. Claims the whole town's talking about you carrying a devil child." "Not a devil," Isabella whispered, her face glowing with perspiration and something else, something that seemed to emanate from within her skin like captured starlight. "An angel. But people fear angels almost as much as demons, don't they? Both are too powerful for human understanding." Another contraction seized her, and this time the very air in the room seemed to shimmer. Jake felt the hair on his arms stand up as if lightning were about to strike inside the house. The oil lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their flames, and somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard music that sounded like nothing earthly. "Jake," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the pain, "you're going to have to deliver her yourself. This baby won't wait for anyone else to find courage." She reached out and gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Don't be afraid of what you see. Promise me you won't be afraid." What choice did he have? Jake had delivered foals and calves, but never a human baby, and certainly never one that seemed to be announcing its arrival with supernatural fireworks. He boiled water and gathered clean cloths, while Isabella's labor intensified, each contraction accompanied by phenomena that defied explanation. The temperature in the room fluctuated between desert heat and mountain cold. Windows rattled without wind. And through it all, that ethereal music grew stronger, as if celestial choirs were gathering to witness this birth. At 3 in the morning, as the storm reached its peak fury, Isabella gave one final cry that harmonized perfectly with the thunder. The baby emerged in a burst of golden light, so bright that Jake had to shield his eyes, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw wings made of pure radiance unfurling and folding again before disappearing entirely. The light faded, leaving only a perfectly normal-looking infant girl with her father's strong chin and her mother's expressive eyes. But those eyes, Jake had never seen eyes like those on a newborn. They were aware, intelligent, and when they focused on his face, he felt as if he were being examined by something ancient and infinitely wise. "She's beautiful," Jake whispered, wrapping the baby in clean blankets and placing her in Isabella's arms. But even as he spoke, he noticed things that made his hands tremble. The baby wasn't crying, though her breathing was strong and steady. Her tiny fingers seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. And when she looked at him, Jake felt a peace settle over his spirit that he'd never experienced before, as if every worry and fear he'd ever carried had simply melted away. "Her name is Hope," Isabella said, her voice filled with exhaustion and joy. "Sam chose it in a dream before he died. He said she would bring hope to places where it had never existed before." She looked up at Jake with gratitude that made his heart ache. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for bringing us home." Outside, the storm was ending as suddenly as it had begun. The thunder faded to distant rumbles, the rain gentled to a whisper, and through the clearing clouds, stars began to appear like tiny fires of promise in the darkness. Jake sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Isabella nurse her impossible daughter, and wondered what other miracles this child would bring to a town that desperately needed reasons to believe in something greater than violence and despair. The baby opened her eyes and looked directly at him. And Jake Morrison, hardened sheriff and practical man, felt tears stream down his cheeks as he recognized truth in that infant gaze. This wasn't just a child. This was hope made flesh, love given form, and the answer to prayers he hadn't even known he'd been praying. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin when the town discovered what had been born in their midst. But tonight, in this quiet room filled with golden light and celestial music, Jake allowed himself to believe that miracles were still possible in a world that had forgotten how to hope. By noon the next day, half of Redemption Creek had gathered outside Jake's house like an angry swarm of locusts. The storm had ended, but the fear it left behind spread through town faster than wildfire in dry grass. Word of the strange birth had leaked from Madame Rose's girls, who'd seen the golden light from across the street and heard the impossible music that accompanied Hope's arrival. Preacher Matthias Crane stood at the front of the crowd, his black coat and severe expression making him look like death incarnate. He'd arrived from the next county just that morning, drawn by reports of supernatural events that demanded immediate investigation. His voice carried across the yard with the authority of someone who'd spent decades convincing people that God's love came with conditions. "Sheriff Morrison," Crane called out, his Bible clutched like a weapon against his chest. "We demand to see this child that was born in corruption and darkness. The Lord's work cannot be done while the devil walks among us in innocent form." Jake stepped onto his porch, his hand resting on his gun belt more from habit than any intention to use it. Behind him, Isabella sat in the rocking chair with Hope in her arms, both of them surrounded by that same faint golden glow that seemed to pulse with the baby's heartbeat. "This is private property, preacher," Jake said firmly. "And that's a newborn child you're talking about, not some monster from your fever dreams." "Then show us the child," demanded Martha Henderson, the banker's wife and unofficial moral authority for every respectable woman in town. "If there's nothing unnatural about this birth, you have nothing to hide." The crowd murmured agreement, their faces showing the kind of suspicious hostility that turned neighbors into enemies and friends into threats. Jake recognized the look from his years of sheriffing. It was the expression people wore right before they did something they'd regret for the rest of their lives. Isabella appeared beside him, hope cradled gently in her arms. The moment the baby came into view, something extraordinary happened. The crowd's angry muttering faded to silence as Hope's presence washed over them like water over drought-cracked earth. Several people took involuntary steps backward, not from fear, but from something closer to awe. "She's just a baby," whispered Tom Fletcher, the blacksmith whose arthritis had plagued him for years. As he spoke, he flexed his fingers in amazement. "My hands, the pain's gone." Hope turned her head toward the crowd, her infant eyes somehow managing to make contact with each person present. Where her gaze fell, Jake watched expressions change from suspicion to wonder, from anger to peace. The baby wasn't doing anything visible, but her very presence seemed to drain the venom from the gathering mob. Preacher Crane alone seemed immune to Hope's influence. If anything, the child's effect on the others made his face darker with righteous fury. "Bewitchment," he snarled. "This creature is using Satan's power to cloud your minds and corrupt your souls." But even as he spoke, his words carried less conviction. Martha Henderson was staring at Hope with tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her chest where she'd carried grief for a son lost in the war. Old Pete Lawson had removed his hat and was openly weeping, his usual bitter scowl replaced by something resembling joy. "She's healing them," Isabella said softly, her voice filled with wonder at her daughter's gift. "Not their bodies, though some of that too. She's healing their hearts." Hope made a small sound. Not quite a cry, but something musical and pure. The sound seemed to resonate in everyone's chest, creating harmony where moments before there had been discord. The crowd began to disperse naturally, people walking away with expressions of peace Jake had never seen on most of their faces. Only Preacher Crane remained, his eyes blazing with fanatic determination. "This isn't over, Morrison. I've seen demons spawn before, and I know how to deal with them. That creature won't corrupt this town while I draw breath." As the preacher stalked away, Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. He'd seen that kind of zealous hatred before, and he knew it wouldn't be satisfied with words or warnings. Crane would be back, and next time he'd come prepared for war against a baby whose only crime was bringing peace to a place that had forgotten what it felt like. Hope gurgled softly in her mother's arms, completely unaware that her first day in the world had already marked her as either salvation or damnation, depending on who was doing the judging. 3 days after Hope's birth, Jake found Isabella sitting by the window in the early morning light, nursing her daughter while tears streamed silently down her cheeks. The baby's presence continued to affect everyone who came near. The mailman whistled cheerfully for the first time in years. Doc Martinez had stopped drinking, and even the stray dogs seemed calmer around the house. But Isabella carried the weight of secrets that were clearly eating at her soul. "You need to know the whole truth," she said without looking at him. "About that night in the church. About what really happened to me." Her voice trembled with the fear of someone about to reveal something that might destroy the fragile trust they'd built together. Jake poured himself coffee and sat across from her, noting how Hope's eyes seemed to follow their conversation with impossible awareness for a 3-day-old infant. "I'm listening." Isabella took a shuddering breath. "The stranger who came to me in the storm, he wasn't entirely human. But he wasn't what people would call an angel either." She shifted Hope to her other arm, the baby's golden glow pulsing gently with her heartbeat. "He told me he was a guardian, one of the beings sent to watch over places where the fabric between worlds grows thin." "What does that mean?" Jake asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Redemption Creek sits on what he called a crossroads," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke the truth she'd been hiding. "A place where violence has soaked so deep into the land that it's starting to tear holes between the world of the living and other places. Dark places where things wait for chances to slip through." Jake felt his blood chill as he remembered the increasing violence that had plagued their territory over the past few years. The Garrett Gang was just the latest in a series of brutal conflicts that seemed to escalate beyond all reason, as if something was feeding on the hatred and making it grow stronger. The guardian told me a child would be born who could heal these tears, Isabella whispered. But first, she had to be conceived in perfect love between two souls willing to sacrifice everything for each other. Her eyes met Jake's with devastating honesty. Sam's love called her into existence. His death gave her the power she needed to be born. And your promise to protect us completed the trinity of sacrifice required for her mission. Hope made a soft sound and reached out with tiny fingers that seemed to glow brighter as Isabella spoke. Jake watched in amazement as dust motes in the sunlight began moving in patterns around the baby, creating spirals of light that felt almost like a visual manifestation of joy. So she really is. Jake struggled with words for something beyond his experience. She's human, Isabella said firmly. But she's also something more. The guardian's touch didn't create her from nothing. It awakened abilities that exist in the bloodline of people who've suffered greatly but never lost their capacity for love. She looked down at Hope with infinite tenderness. Your partner Sam had that bloodline. I have it too. And our daughter. She's the culmination of generations of people who chose love over hatred even when it cost them everything. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Jake opened it to find Chief Running Bear of the local Apache band. The old man's weathered face was grave, but not hostile as he studied the scene inside the house. I felt her presence the night she was born, the chief said in careful English. My people have prophecies about such children. We call them bridge walkers, those who can step between worlds and heal what has been torn. Isabella stood, still holding Hope, and approached the Apache chief with respect. Your people know about her? Running Bear nodded solemnly. The spirits have been restless for many seasons, growing angry as white man's violence poisoned the sacred places. But 3 nights ago, they grew quiet for the first time in years. His ancient eyes fixed on Hope with recognition. This child carries the blessing of both worlds, the strength of those who conquered and the wisdom of those who were conquered. She can heal the wounds between our peoples. Preacher Crane wants to destroy her, Jake said bluntly. Claims she's demonic. Men like him fear what they cannot control, Running Bear replied. But fear makes men dangerous. You will need allies when he returns with others who share his blindness. The chief reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a small woven charm. For the child, it will help focus her power when the time comes to use it. As the Apache leader departed, Jake stared at the charm, now hanging above Hope's makeshift crib. Everything he'd thought he understood about the world had crumbled in the space of a week, replaced by realities that challenged every assumption he'd ever made about the nature of good, evil, and the spaces in between. What happens now? He asked Isabella. She smiled, and for the first time since Sam's death, the expression reached her eyes. Now we prepare for war. Because hope this powerful always attracts enemies willing to destroy the world rather than let it be healed. Hope gurgled softly, her tiny hand reaching toward the charm that spun slowly in the morning light, and Jake realized he was about to discover just how far he'd go to protect a miracle. That evening, Chief Running Bear returned with 3 Apache elders, their faces painted with symbols Jake didn't recognize, but somehow understood meant protection and blessing. They sat in a circle around Hope's crib while Isabella and Jake listened to stories that stretched back generations, tales of children born at crossroads between worlds who carried the power to reshape entire territories. Long before white settlers came, Running Bear began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient memory. Our medicine men saw visions of a time when violence would poison this land so deeply that spirits of war would try to break through from Shadow Realm. He gestured toward Hope, who lay perfectly still but alert, her golden glow pulsing in rhythm with his words. They saw a child who would be born of 2 bloods, 2 worlds, 2 kinds of love, mortal and divine. Elder White Crow, a woman whose hair was silver as moonlight, leaned forward to study Hope's face. This child carries marks of the prophecy. See how light gathers around her, how even the air grows peaceful in her presence. She reached out with gnarled fingers, and Hope grasped them with surprising strength. She knows us, recognizes the guardians who have waited for her coming. Jake watched in amazement as Hope's eyes seemed to communicate with the elderly Apache woman without words. The baby made soft sounds that almost resembled attempts at the clicking language the elders used among themselves, as if she was trying to respond in their own tongue. What exactly is she supposed to do? Isabella asked, her voice mixing hope with fear for her daughter's destiny. The third elder, a man called Stone Walker, pulled out a hide painting covered with symbols and figures. The prophecy speaks of 3 trials she must face before her power reaches full strength. First, she must turn the hearts of those who profit from violence. Second, she must heal a wound in the earth itself where too much blood has been spilled. Third, she must face the shadow spirits that will try to destroy her before she can complete her mission. Isabella's grip tightened on Jake's hand. She's just a baby. How can an infant face trials like that? She will not face them alone, Running Bear said firmly. The spirits chose her guardians carefully, a lawman whose heart seeks justice above personal gain. He nodded toward Jake, a mother whose love survived corruption and emerged purified, and others who will be called when the time comes. His eyes grew distant. I see a doctor who will tend the wounded, a teacher who will help her understand her gifts. Even some who now oppose her will become her protectors when they witness what she can do. As if responding to his words, Hope began to make sounds that grew increasingly musical. The Apache elders smiled, recognizing something in her baby talk that escaped Jake entirely. She's singing, White Crow translated with wonder. An ancient song of healing that hasn't been heard for 300 years. How does she know melodies that died with the last medicine singers? Stone Walker studied his hide, painting more closely, comparing symbols to the patterns of light that played around Hope's small form. Because she carries the memory of all who suffered to create the peace she represents. Every warrior who chose mercy over vengeance. Every mother who forgave her child's killer. Every leader who picked unity over division. Their spirits live in her blood. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were describing. Are you saying she's some kind of reincarnation? Not reincarnation, Running Bear corrected. Culmination. The best parts of countless souls who died hoping their sacrifice would someday create a world where their children could live without fear. She is what they died believing was possible. The sound of approaching horses cut through their conversation, and Jake recognized the voices of angry men gathering outside. Through the window, he could see torches flickering in the darkness and the black silhouette of Preacher Crane leading what looked like 20 armed riders. The first trial begins, White Crow said calmly, though Jake noticed her hand moving to the knife at her belt. Those who profit from violence will try to destroy hope before it can grow strong enough to challenge them. Isabella gathered hope protectively as the baby's glow intensified, responding to the approaching threat with power that made the very walls of the house seem to pulse with golden light. What do we do? Jake asked, checking his ammunition and wishing he'd prepared better for this confrontation. We trust in what she represents, Running Bear replied, rising to his feet with the dignity of a man who'd faced death many times without flinching. Violence cannot destroy love. Hatred cannot overcome hope. And those who serve darkness will find themselves powerless against one who carries the light of all who refuse to surrender their humanity. Hope's song grew stronger, and Jake realized he could hear it now. Not just baby sounds, but something hauntingly beautiful that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the land was finally finding its voice to sing of peace after decades of screaming in pain. Outside, Preacher Crane's voice rose in condemnation, but Jake noticed something strange. Some of the men who'd ridden with him were dismounting and walking away, their faces reflecting the same wonder he'd seen on the crowd 3 days earlier. Hope's influence was already working, turning enemies into allies simply by existing in her perfect, impossible innocence. The real battle was about to begin, but Jake found himself believing, perhaps for the first time in his life, that good might actually triumph over evil if it had the right champion to lead the fight. Preacher Crane's remaining followers spread out around Jake's house like predators circling wounded prey, their torches casting dancing shadows that made the night seem alive with malevolent spirits. But as they drew closer, something extraordinary began to happen. Hope's golden glow intensified until it spilled through the windows, bathing the entire yard in light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Stand down," Crane commanded his men, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Several of his followers had already dropped their weapons, staring at the house with expressions of wonder rather than hatred. The torches in their hands flickered and died one by one, as if Hope's presence was too pure to allow artificial fire to burn in her vicinity. Jake stepped onto the porch with Isabella beside him, Hope cradled in her arms like a tiny beacon against the darkness. The baby's eyes were wide open, fixed on the preacher with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. When she made a soft sound, part coo, part musical note, the remaining hostility in the air began to dissolve like smoke in wind. "Look at her," whispered Tom Fletcher, the blacksmith who'd felt his arthritis disappear days earlier. "She's just a baby. What kind of men are we, coming here armed against an infant?" "The devil can appear as an angel of light," Crane snarled, but his conviction was wavering. Even he seemed affected by Hope's presence, his rigid posture softening despite his efforts to maintain righteous fury. "This creature will corrupt everything pure in this town if we don't act." Hope turned her gaze toward the preacher, and Jake watched in amazement as the man's expression began to change. The fanatical hatred faded from his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. His hands trembled as he lowered the rifle he'd been pointing at Isabella. "I know you," Crane whispered, his voice filled with sudden wonder. "I've seen your face before. In dreams. In visions I thought came from God." His weapon fell completely as understanding dawned. "You're not here to destroy. You're here to heal what I helped break." The confession came pouring out like water from a burst dam. For 20 years, Preacher Crane had traveled from town to town, spreading a gospel of fear and condemnation that had torn communities apart, turned neighbors against each other, created the very violence and hatred that had poisoned places like Redemption Creek. His sermons had justified lynchings, blessed wars, encouraged the kind of righteous cruelty that left wounds in both earth and spirit. "I've been the devil I claimed to fight," he said, sinking to his knees in the dirt. "Every word of judgment, every call for holy violence, every soul I convinced that God's love came with conditions. I've been the one spreading darkness while claiming to serve the light." Hope made another musical sound, and this time Jake heard it clearly, not just baby talk, but something that resonated in his chest like the memory of every lullaby his mother had sung, every prayer his father had whispered, every moment of pure love he'd ever experienced. The sound washed over the remaining men, and one by one, they began to lower their weapons. "She's forgiving me," Crane whispered in amazement. "After everything I've done, everything I've destroyed, she's offering me forgiveness I don't deserve and can never earn." Isabella stepped forward, hope still glowing softly in her arms. "That's what she does," she said gently. "She sees the pain that makes people choose hatred over love, and she heals it at the source. You were afraid, so you tried to make others afraid too. But fear can't survive in the presence of perfect love." Chief Running Bear emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting with his warriors, but instead of weapons, they carried sage bundles and sacred pipes. "The first trial is complete," he announced. "Those who profited from violence have seen truth and chosen differently. Now comes the second trial, healing the wound in the earth itself." Jake felt the ground beneath his feet begin to vibrate, not with earthquake tremors, but with something that felt alive and aware. The land around Redemption Creek had absorbed too much blood, too much hatred, too much pain. It was sick with accumulated violence, and that sickness had been drawing dark spirits like infection draws poison. Hope's glow expanded outward, spreading beyond the house into the yard, the street, the surrounding desert. Where her light touched, Jake could see the earth itself beginning to change. Grass grew greener, flowers bloomed out of season, and even the rocks seemed to shimmer with renewed vitality. "My God," Doc Martinez whispered from where he'd arrived with other townspeople drawn by the commotion. "She's healing the land itself." But even as Hope's power spread healing across the wounded earth, Jake sensed something else approaching. The Apache elders felt it too, their faces growing grave as they looked toward the eastern horizon where darkness seemed to be gathering despite the late hour. "The shadow spirits know what she's doing," Running Bear said urgently. "They're coming to stop her before the healing can be completed. This is the third trial, the one that will determine whether hope or despair rules this territory." The temperature dropped suddenly, and the horses began whinnying in terror. Something was moving in the darkness beyond Hope's light, something that brought with it the accumulated malice of every violent act ever committed on this land. The real battle was just beginning, and Jake realized that everything they'd faced so far had been mere preparation for the confrontation that would determine whether a baby's impossible love could triumph over forces that had been feeding on human hatred for generations. Hope's song grew stronger, calling forth allies and defenses Jake couldn't see, but could feel gathering around them like an army of light preparing for war against an enemy made of pure darkness. The shadow spirits came at dawn like a tide of living darkness, pouring across the desert toward Redemption Creek with the accumulated fury of every act of violence ever committed on this sacred land. They had no true form, but Jake could see them as writhing masses of hatred and despair that seemed to devour light itself wherever they touched the earth. Hope's response was immediate and overwhelming. The golden glow that had been pulsing gently around her small form exploded outward in waves of pure radiance that met the approaching darkness head-on. Where light and shadow collided, the very air seemed to scream with the sound of spiritual warfare that had been building for decades. "Everyone get behind the house," Jake shouted, but most of the townspeople were frozen in awe and terror at the impossible battle unfolding before them. The Apache elders began chanting in their ancient language, their voices weaving protective spells around the baby, who had become the focal point of a conflict between forces beyond human understanding. Isabella held Hope close to her chest, the baby's power flowing through her with such intensity that her own skin began to glow with reflected light. "She's fighting them," Isabella whispered in amazement. "A 3-week-old baby is holding back an army of demons through pure love." But the effort was taking its toll. Hope's breathing became labored, her tiny form trembling with exhaustion as she poured her essence into the battle against darkness that had been festering in this land for generations. Each wave of light that pushed back the shadow spirits seemed to drain more of her strength. "She can't keep this up," Doc Martinez said, his medical instincts overriding his amazement at the supernatural confrontation. "No human child, no matter how gifted, can sustain this kind of spiritual output. She'll burn herself out." Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered face grim with understanding. The prophecy spoke of this moment. The bridge walker cannot complete her mission alone. She needs willing hearts to channel her power through. He looked around at the assembled crowd. Everyone who has been touched by her healing, everyone whose heart has been changed by her presence, must choose now whether to help her save this land or watch her die trying to do it alone. Preacher Crane was the first to step forward, his face still wet with tears of repentance. "I spent 20 years spreading the poison she's trying to cure. If there's a way to help her, I'll pay any price to make amends." He placed his hand on Hope's tiny foot, and immediately the baby's glow intensified, drawing strength from his transformed heart. One by one, others followed. Tom Fletcher, Martha Henderson, Even some of the former gang members who'd been planning to rob the bank before Hope's birth had somehow changed their hearts. Each person who touched her, who offered their own spiritual strength to support her mission, added to the growing network of light that was pushing back the tide of accumulated darkness. Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what was happening. Hope wasn't just healing the land. She was creating a community of people who were choosing love over fear, unity over division, hope over despair. The shadow spirits weren't just being fought back by her power. They were being starved of the negative emotions that fed them. But there was still a choice to be made, and Jake knew it was his to make. 3 federal marshals had arrived during the night, drawn by reports of supernatural events that threatened territorial stability. They stood at the edge of the crowd with weapons drawn, clearly prepared to end what they saw as dangerous mystical nonsense that was disrupting normal life. Sheriff Morrison, Marshal Davis called out, his voice cutting through the spiritual battle raging around them. We need to restore order here. Whatever this is, it's creating panic across 3 counties. People are abandoning their homes to come see this miracle baby, and that kind of mass hysteria is dangerous. Jake looked at Hope, whose power was now flowing through dozens of willing hearts, creating a web of light that seemed to be healing not just the immediate area, but spreading outward across the entire territory. Telegraph reports were already coming in from neighboring towns. Violence had ceased, old feuds were being resolved. Enemies were laying down their weapons and embracing like brothers. Marshal, Jake said carefully, what if the hysteria is justified? What if this really is a miracle that could end the cycle of violence that's been destroying this territory? Miracles don't exist, Marshal Davis replied firmly. What exists is mass delusion, religious mania, and the kind of dangerous thinking that leads to cult formation and social breakdown. We have orders to take the child into federal custody for everyone's protection. The choice crystallized in Jake's mind with perfect clarity. He could hand Hope over to authorities who would hide her away, study her, probably destroy her gift in the name of maintaining order. Or he could trust in what he'd witnessed, believe in the impossible, and help complete the healing that Sam Hayes had died to make possible. Jake stepped forward to place his own hand on Hope's glowing form, adding his strength to the network of light that now connected dozens of hearts across the desert. Marshal, I took an oath to protect and serve this community. Right now, protecting them means protecting her. The shadow spirits made one final assault, a wave of pure malevolence that crashed against the combined light of Hope's supporters like a tsunami of hatred against a seawall of love. For a moment, the outcome hung in balance. Then the darkness shattered completely, dissolving into nothing more threatening than morning mist. Hope opened her eyes and smiled, her first real smile. And in that moment, Jake felt something fundamental change in the very fabric of the world around them. The long night of violence was ending, and a new day of peace was beginning. The federal marshals lowered their weapons, their faces showing the same wonder that had transformed everyone else who'd encountered Hope's gift. The choice had been made, and it was the right one. 5 years later, Sheriff Jake Morrison stood on the porch of his expanded house, watching 5-year-old Hope play in the garden with children from 3 different Apache bands, 2 Mexican families, and the offspring of former outlaws who'd settled in Redemption Creek after their hearts were changed by a baby's impossible love. The sight still amazed him. Children of former enemies playing together with the natural harmony their parents had forgotten was possible. Sheriff Jake, Hope called out, her voice carrying that same musical quality that had marked her from birth. Watch what the flowers do when I sing to them. She began humming a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself, and the roses responded by blooming more vibrantly, their colors deepening and their fragrance sweetening until the entire garden smelled like paradise. Isabella emerged from the house carrying a basket of fresh bread, her face radiant with the contentment of someone who'd found peace after years of struggle. She and Jake had married 2 years after Hope's birth, creating the family that Sam's sacrifice had made possible. Their love was quiet but deep, built on shared purpose and mutual devotion to the miracle child they were raising together. "The Federal Commission is here," Isabella told him, nodding toward the approaching group of well-dressed officials who'd come to document what newspapers were calling the Redemption Creek phenomenon. For 3 years, scholars, scientists, and government representatives had been studying the territory that had become the most peaceful region in the American West. Marshall Davis, the same federal officer who'd once wanted to take Hope into custody, now served as the territorial liaison for what had become known as the Peace Zone, a 100-mile radius around Redemption Creek, where violence had simply ceased to exist. Weapons misfired when used in anger, horses refused to charge into battle, and even the most hardened criminals found their hatred transforming into something else when they entered Hope's sphere of influence. "Good morning, Sheriff," Davis said, his demeanor respectful rather than skeptical. 3 years of documented miracles had convinced even the most rational minds that something unprecedented was happening in this remote desert town. "We've received reports of another expansion. The Peace Zone has grown another 20 miles eastward in the past month." Jake nodded, unsurprised by the news. Hope's influence had been growing steadily as she matured, her ability to transform hearts strengthening with each passing year. What had started as a baby's innocent love had become a force for change that was reshaping the entire American frontier. "She's not trying to expand it," Jake explained, gesturing toward Hope as she taught the other children how to make music with ordinary stones. "It just happens naturally as more people experience what she represents. Love spreads like ripples in a pond. You can't contain it once it starts moving." The commission members observed Hope with the careful attention of scientists studying a phenomenon they couldn't quite explain. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, the Harvard researcher who'd been documenting the changes for 2 years, made notes while watching Hope heal a bird's broken wing with nothing more than gentle touch and patient humming. "The physiological changes in people who spend time near her are measurable but inexplicable," Dr. Reynolds reported to her colleagues. "Reduced aggression hormones, increased empathy responses, enhanced capacity for forgiveness and cooperation. It's as if she's triggering evolutionary changes in human behavior simply by being present." Chief Running Bear approached the group, his aged face serene with the satisfaction of prophecy fulfilled. "My people have stories of such children appearing at great turning points in history," he told the commissioners. "Always when darkness threatens to overcome light, when violence grows so great that the earth itself cries out for healing. They come to remind us what we can become when we choose love over fear." Hope finished her lesson with the stones and skipped over to the adults, her eyes bright with the joy of a child who'd never known anything but acceptance and love. When she looked up at the federal commissioners, Jake watched their formal demeanor melt into smiles despite their efforts to maintain professional distance. "Hello," Hope said simply, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in everyone's chest. "Are you here to learn about peace? I can teach you if you want. It's really very simple once you understand that everyone just wants to be loved." Marshall Davis knelt down to Hope's level, his gruff exterior completely gone. "What would you teach us, little one?" Hope considered the question with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. "That being afraid makes people do mean things, but love makes the fear go away. And when there's no more fear, there's no more need for fighting." She reached out and took his hand, and Jake saw the marshal's eyes fill with tears as Hope's gift touched whatever wounded places he carried in his heart. As the sun set over Redemption Creek, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed somehow more beautiful than sunsets anywhere else, Jake reflected on the miracle that had transformed his life and his world. Sam Hayes had died believing that love could change everything, and his faith had called forth a child who was proving him right one heart at a time. The territorial reports spoke of crime rates dropping to unprecedented lows, of ancient tribal conflicts ending in reconciliation, of former enemies becoming friends and business partners. But Jake knew the real miracle wasn't in the statistics. It was in the laughter of children playing together regardless of their heritage, in the sight of former outlaws teaching Sunday school, in the knowledge that his adopted daughter was growing up in a world where her greatest power was also her greatest gift, the ability to see the light in every human heart and reflect it back until darkness had no place to hide. Hope tugged at his hand, drawing his attention to the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Look, Papa Jake," she said, using the name she'd given him when she first learned to talk. "Even the stars shine brighter here now. Everything shines brighter when there's enough love to go around." And as Jake looked up at the heavens that seemed to sparkle with unusual brilliance above their peaceful valley, he whispered a prayer of gratitude to the partner who'd made it all possible. "Thank you, Sam. Your dying wish became all our living hope." The new dawn had arrived in the American West, carried in the heart of a child who proved that miracles were real and love truly could conquer all. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that hope can emerge from the darkest circumstances, subscribe to this channel for more incredible tales of courage, faith, and the power of love to transform even the most broken places. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these amazing stories from America's frontier, where ordinary people discovered extraordinary truths about what it means to be human.